This episode is brought to you by Peacock. The new Peacock original documentary, Matthew Perry, A Hollywood Tragedy, dives deep into the beloved actor's rise to fame and his tragic death. 5 people, including Perry's personal assistant, 2 medical doctors, and an alleged Hollywood drug dealer known as the Ketamine Queen, were charged with conspiracy to illegally provide Perry with the ketamine. Explore the details of the case in this heartbreaking special, streaming now only on Peacock.
It's More Money with leading economist Steve Moore. Now, here's your host, Steve Moore.
Welcome back, folks. This is the More Money Show on WABC, where we talk about money, we talk about finance, we talk about politics. I always say, I've said this, for the last 3 or 4 years as I've been doing this show, and by the way, it is a great privilege to do this show, that I am not the world's greatest radio talk show host, but I do get some of the world's greatest guests on my show. And that certainly is true of my next guest, Scott Walker, Governor Scott Walker, that is, from the great state of Wisconsin, who did more to transform Wisconsin into a pro-growth state than probably any governor in Wisconsin history. He was courageous. He was always under assault from the left, and yet did some amazing things in the state of Wisconsin. So first of all, Scott Walker, thanks so much for joining.
Hey, Steve, great to be with you. Thanks for having me on.
And so you are now the president of the Young America's Foundation. Tell people tell people about Young America's Foundation.
Yeah, simply put, we train the next generation of leaders in the fight for freedom. Stand up and talk about free enterprise, individual liberties, strong national defense, traditional American values, YAF.org if people are interested. We'd love to have students, college, high school, and middle school, and beyond.
Yeah, no, I love it. I've done many speech on college campuses around the country for YAF, and it's a great way. A lot of the students come up to me, Governor, after I speak, and they say, I've never even heard these ideas before. Well,
that's exactly right. When we held our college conference in the summer in Washington, those students in 1 week hear from more speakers, more quality, outstanding conservative speakers in that 1 week time than they probably heard their entire lives. And,
that's amazing.
That's not because our conference is awesome, which it is. It's because it just shows you what a void there is, be it in college or even in high school and younger, just hearing about the ideas that formed and shaped America.
So, Governor Walker, you had sent me a note the other day about what's going on with some of the reforms that you had put in place when you were governor, and I want to get into that. But and I know you've mentioned this to my audience again, but it just bears repeating that when people talk about insurrections, when you were governor and you took out some of the government unions, you had an insurrection in your state capital, and right. I think it's important for people to know what happened.
Yeah, it wasn't for a couple of hours. It was literally for nearly a month. The Occupy movement, I always say, didn't start on Wall Street. It started on my street, Madison, Wisconsin at the time. And it's where they for nearly a month, took over the state capitol, took over the rotunda, took over the square, about 100,000 strong. They had people from all over the nation in. And it was a total resist movement. It was to try and stop our legislative body from actually acting on those reforms. Now, thankfully, they weren't intimidated. They didn't back down. And today, according to one group, the MacIver Institute, those reforms have saved the hardworking taxpayers of Wisconsin more than $30 billion. But more importantly, they took the power and put it back into the hands of the hardworking taxpayers.
And so this is important, folks, because I remember when this happened, and the governor probably doesn't want to tell you this, but his life was in danger. There's no question there were threats against his life and his family. And I don't think anybody went to jail.
No. They even had some of the folks showed up and had not fake, but they had physicians from some of the University of Wisconsin system hospitals that were writing out fake or false excuse notes as though they were sick so they could come and protest. It was just out of control. But thankfully, in the end, we prevailed. The people of the state just realized that's not acceptable. That's not how you get things done. You can have a debate, you can differ, but you just can't come and take things over. And that's what happened. And like I said, it wasn't just for a couple hours. It was for nearly 4 weeks.
Oh, yeah. You can go on the internet, folks, and you can look at the pictures of it. This was an occupation. This was an occupation of the Capitol. And this is really important because I had a party this past weekend, Governor, for many of what we call the J6ers, the people on January 6th, who did not, I'm talking about, now some of them should have been arrested because some of them, illegally went into the Capitol. Some of them pushed a police officer, and that is not acceptable behavior. But Governor, there were hundreds of Americans who were simply exercising their First Amendment rights. They never went into the Capitol, and yet they were put in jail.
Yeah, and in this case, you contrast that with what happened years ago in Wisconsin, and people taking doors off the hinges, crawling in through windows, breaking glass, doing all sorts of things and damage to the state capitol. And really you had minimal, if any, people in terms of actually facing consequences for that. The few, the outright death threats where there were tangible evidence that some of them, the action was taken, but by and large, it was just done with pure immunity.
Yeah. So look, folks, this is very important because it shows how unfair our justice system is in America, that you can have something like what happened in Wisconsin, that as the governor said, it didn't happen for a few hours. It happened for days and days and days. And yet, none of those people went to jail, and yet many people, in other words, what you had in Wisconsin was a true insurrection. I'm not so sure that was true of what happened January 6th. So tell me, Governor, you sent me an urgent note the other day about what's going on in Wisconsin, about some of the savings that you were able to, pass on to the citizens of Wisconsin. And now many of those policies are in jeopardy. What's happening?
Yeah. A month from today, literally April 1st, is an election for the state Supreme Court in Wisconsin. It will determine whether it's a 4-3 split that's liberal or a 4-3 split that's conservative, and not just liberal or conservative, but in this case, whether there's going to be a fourth activist liberal justice on. And what we saw, we've already started to see, but what we particularly have seen is it'll have an impact both on Wisconsin and the nation. On Wisconsin, the things you were just talking about, Act 10, $30 billion of savings, changing seniority and tenure so that schools, towns, cities, villages, and state government can staff based on merit. They can pay based on performance. They can do the things that make the private sector work well time and time again. Mm-hmm. All that would be gone. Plus, even as far back as 35 years ago, things like school choice, the original voucher program in America, started in Milwaukee, that could be gone. Voter ID could be gone. And probably most disturbing on a national basis is that the proponents, the supporters of one of the candidates, the liberal Susan Crawford, her allies just sent out an invitation saying her election would mean 2 House seats would be redrawn here in Wisconsin away from Republican control to Democrat control.
Wow.
And that, after a vote the other day, we saw 217, 215. Yeah. That could change things even before 2026.
You mean they could change it immediately?
Yeah, they could.
I thought they had. No, wow, I've never heard that. I mean, how can they do that? I thought they could only do that every 10 years. I didn't think they could redraw.
That's when it's required to be done. It must be done every decade. But the court has made it clear that they could come in and are planning to come in and redraw the boundaries. Yep.
So, folks, this is very important what we're talking about, because they could basically, by rejiggering the lines, take away the Republican majority in the House of Representatives. This is scary stuff. And these people believe that the ends justify the means, so they will do whatever they can to do it. So that you're saying that what matters then is this Supreme Court, your state Supreme Court vote.
That's exactly right. If it's 4-3, if you've got Brad Schimel, a former Wisconsin attorney general, now a circuit court judge, someone who understands that his role as a judge is to uphold the Constitution and the laws therein, no more, no less, someone who's going to uphold the rule of law. If Brad Schimel is elected a month from today, then you have a stable discussion where things stand the way the governor and the legislature have acted. If you have Susan Crawford, the liberal, on a month from today, she wins. Then when she takes the oath of office, you're very likely, I mean, they've all but said it, that they're going to take all these aggressive actions to be an activist court, essentially take the place of the governor and the legislature, And again, if you're listening, it's not just a problem for us in Wisconsin. It's a problem both immediately with the House
and for the whole country.
And far into the future, for voter ID and other things could move Wisconsin from being a battleground to a firmly blue state as well.
So thank you for the update on that, Governor. I wanted to just switch subjects for our last remaining few minutes. You ran for president in 2016 because you were such a fabulously successful governor. And one of the people you ran against was Donald J. Trump. And so exactly right. I wonder, have you gotten to know Donald Trump? What do you think of his policies? And are you friends with him? Tell me about your relationship with him.
No, I think it's just been outstanding. It's hard to believe it's 2 months, but it's been a whirlwind, but it's been remarkable. You talked before about legal double standards. It's been interesting. The court of public opinion, there's an interesting double standard. I'm old enough to remember when Bill Clinton and Al Gore talked about hundreds of thousands of changes in the federal workforce as part of waste, fraud, and abuse, and they were all applauded. That was a good thing. Now, when it happens now, it's suddenly not so good. Well, the reality is, particularly I think with this USAID stuff, this is revealing. And when defenders of that say, "Oh, it's just 1% of the federal budget," what they're really saying is, "Don't look at this." What people should do is look at it because it shows you exactly what's happening elsewhere in the federal government. And as you mentioned, as a governor, I at the Medicaid billing, for example, because you want Medicaid to go to people who need it, the truly poor, the needy families, children, seniors. You don't want it for working age, childless adults. We made changes in Wisconsin. I would hope out of this changes will happen in Washington. But that's the kind of stuff you want to know about, plus the fraud, where you hear the 150-year-old, supposed 150-year-old collecting Social Security. Well, that shouldn't happen. And there's a lot of people making money off of things like that are worried more people look into it.
So you're so right about this Medicaid issue, and I wanted to ask you about that because you were a governor for eight. How many years were you? 8 years?
8 years, yeah, exactly. Yeah,
8 years. But they kept trying to recall you, right? You had to have, three elections. So I knew you were doing the right thing. So one of the things, we were discussing this earlier on the show, and I'd like your reaction to it. This year, California is expected to get $120 billion, not million, $120 billion from the federal government for Medicaid. Now, this is going to be one of the biggest revenue sources for their budget, Governor. And when you were governor, I think the states had to pay, 40 or 50% of the cost of Medicaid. So there was an incentive for the states to, lower the cost. Now, many states get 90% of the money, and only 10% is paid by the states. So the problem I have with this, and I'd like your reaction to this, now the states have an incentive to sign up as many people as possible to Medicaid because it's a moneymaker for them.
Yeah, and it's even worse than that. It's an even bigger shell game. So what many of these states do, particularly after the Medicaid expansion under Obamacare, is what they do is they get the hospitals, including nonprofits, tax-exempt hospitals. So it's crazy that they would even agree to this, but you understand why in a minute. They'll pay a fee. They pay a tax, a provider tax, in return, and they use that to pay for their match. Like you said, it could be as low as 10%. So they're not even really paying that. They're getting the hospital to pay it, but then the hospital in return gets higher reimbursement rates under the Obamacare Medicaid expansion. So it's just this big, absolute money grab. And I've said it all along. I was the only state in America that covered everyone living in poverty and had no gap in insurance for those living in poverty, and yet did not take the Medicaid expansion under Obamacare. My reason was simple. I don't think we should be putting more people on government assistance who don't need it. Government assistance should be like a trampoline, not like a hammock. We should be helping people with a hand up who can. Those who need it will help them. But for those others, get them in the workforce, get them worker training. For those who face addictions, get them help in that regard, but don't make them permanently dependent on the government.
So Republicans in the House, and I've been working with them, they want to have a work requirement for Medicaid. And I believe, and I'd like your reaction to this, I believe, look, if you're someone who's not disabled, if you just said, if you're of working age and you can be working and you want to get a government benefit like free health care paid for by the taxpayers, you should have to be either in a job or looking for a job or in a training program, but sitting at home watching TV and getting free health care, I don't get that.
100%. Couldn't agree with more. I think it is an 80-20, if not a 90-10 issue, meaning the vast majority of Americans, no matter what income class, no matter where they come from, they just understand that. It just makes common sense. Again, we'll help people who need it. That's where the research should go. If someone's got a physical or intellectual disability, you've got kids and you've got a difficult situation there. But most of the people we're talking about that the expansion was about pulling in working age, able-bodied, childless adults who could easily be in the workforce. But instead, by expanding this, you make it, and I think the goal was, when they did this years ago, was to get more people dependent on the government, to get more power and more control there. And that's really, I think, a damning thing on society. We want to help people get into the workforce because that's where true freedom and prosperity come from.
So I couldn't agree more. So we've just got 2 more minutes left with the great former governor of Wisconsin, Scott Walker, one of my favorite governors of all time, who was a real change maker. I'd like your reaction, if I may, Governor, to we've been talking to our callers for the last hour and a half on the show on this. People have very strong opinions. I'd like your opinion on it. The Trump-Zelensky meeting. And, a lot of us were quite offended by the attitude of Zelensky. He seemed very entitled. He seemed self-righteous, and he was sort of belligerent in that White House meeting. And I just wonder what your thoughts are about that.
I think anyone who ever sets foot in that office again over the next 4 years should read The Art of the Deal, because I know you and I get it, Steve.
Yes.
You understand him. He always wants to make a deal, so figure out a way to make it work. Had he just come in and not blown up about this, had not gone off on this, they were ready to make a deal on mineral rights. They were ready to make think about this. I think Putin's an awful, evil person. I think he should have never gone in there.
He's
but
horrible.
In the end, you want peace. You want to end the war. You want to stop the killing there. And so Trump gets it. He needs some way for Putin to save face, get back home. I think had he had a successful outing there, the deal would have been for Putin to get out of the Ukraine. He advanced him to be where he was at pre-Trump, the first term. I think that would have been a deal Zelensky should have taken in a heartbeat. But the bad advice from, I think, European advisors.
Absolutely. Well, Governor, thank you so much for carving some time out of your Saturday afternoon. That's the great former governor of Wisconsin, Scott Walker, who is a hero to all of us who are conservatives. Folks, I hope you have a great weekend. Fun show today. I appreciate the people who called in. Great views. That's why I like to take your calls, folks, because I learned from listening to you. Your opinion matters on WABC. Have a great weekend. We will be back next weekend, same bat time, same bat channel, 1 to 3 p.m. Saturday afternoon, following the Kudlow Show. Adios, and have a great weekend, and we'll be back next week.
Donate now to Toys for Tots, working year-round. Go to toysfortots.org. Toys for Tots supports children in need throughout the year with programs like the Toys for Tots Literacy Program. Established in 2008, has provided over 60 million books to disadvantaged children. The Toys for Tots Literacy Program is committed to providing disadvantaged children with direct access to books and educational resources that enhance their ability to read and communicate effectively. Go to toysfortots.org.